All right, Alexander, let's talk about the situation around the world with oil and food. And the collective West is blaming Russia and Putin. Uh, Putin is coming out and saying this has nothing to do with us. Actually, a lot of this has to do with the lockdowns and all of that stuff. I mean, that's when this all really started. Maybe even before that, you could say a lot of this started. But the sanctions and everything that's been put on Russia has actually just made the situation much worse, and that's why we are in this mess. But one thing's for sure: you can't cut Russia out of the energy market or the food market, and I think the collective West is starting to realize that. Actually, Janet Yellen was giving a testimony to the Senate Finance Committee, and she said that she wants to keep the plan is to keep Russian oil flowing in the global markets, but to make sure that Russia doesn't profit from that oil, and they're going to do that by creating a buyer's cartel and putting a price cap on on the price of oil that they're buying from Russia, under the understanding, I guess, that Russia is not going to find markets outside of the collective West. Is that the thinking?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely incomprehensible what Yellen is talking about. I mean, it just doesn't make any kind of sense to me. Why would the Russians continue to pump and supply oil to global markets if they were not making a profit on its supply? What Yellen is talking about just doesn't make any kind of sense at all. It is illogical. By the way, Peskov, Putin's spokesman, has made that very point. He said, why will, if Russia isn't going to make any money from selling its oil, then it's not going to sell its oil, period. That's something, people need to understand. And I just don't understand. It's what Yellen is talking about. It sounds like she's trying, as we say in Britain, to have her cake and eat it as well. We get all the benefits of Russian oil without actually the Russians getting any money for it. The only way you can do that is by going into Russia, conquering the country, extracting the oil, and profiting from it for yourself. Well, obviously that's not going to happen. So, we're coming up with all these elaborate, complex devices and plans and schemes and all the rest. And Yellen's is just another example. But, none of it makes any kind of sense. It doesn't make any kind of business sense. It doesn't make any kind of commercial sense. From the Russian point of view, if that is the situation, if they're not going to profit from their oil, they're not going to sell any. Why should they? And the idea that their entire economy depends on selling oil is one which by now Westerners ought to be rethinking. It is a misconception. As I've said many times, this is a very diversified, very sophisticated economy. Anyway, that's Yellen. Now, I think what has spooked a lot of people in the West, you mentioned at the start of the programme that everybody's now going around blaming Putin and Russia for the food and oil shortages, especially for the food shortages. What has spooked many people, what has alarmed even the UN Secretary General, Guterres, who, to be very clear, is very pro-Western, is that the chairman of the African Union, the president of Senegal, went to Moscow, had a meeting there with Putin, and he made it absolutely clear that from his point of view, the blame, the reason why the food shortages are now happening, which are affecting Africa so severely, the reason they're happening is because of the sanctions. He openly and squarely blamed the sanctions and Western policy. And of course, that has really unnerved people in the West. And with the president of the African Union now apparently in talks with Putin and with the Russians about delivering Russian wheat and Russian grain to Africa. And as Putin pointed out, and he's pointed out also in a television interview he gave on Russian television, Russia actually produces multiples more food than Ukraine does. It's possible, in fact, it's highly likely, that before very long we're going to see alternative payment arrangements between the Russians and the African countries for the Russians to start receiving Russian oil and Russian grain and wheat. And of course, we've discussed this in the past. The new payment systems will be oil and wheat for rubles, but with all kinds of new payment systems organised, because of course African countries don't have rubles in any great quantity at the moment. But anyway, something being organised along those lines, using the Russian messaging systems, the interbank messaging systems, in substitution for SWIFT. And there's supposed to be a new Africa-Russia summit on the way. And the chairman of the African Union, and remember the president of Senegal has up to now been a pro-Western country, seems to be interested in that idea. And we're getting signs that the Latin Americans are starting to become interested also. So the West has been spooked. They're spooked by the fact that oil prices, energy costs and food prices are rising in the West as well. There's higher inflation. We saw on Thursday the biggest jump in petrol prices in Britain that Britain has experienced in 17 years in a single day. So the West is feeling worried about that, and they're feeling increasingly nervous about the fact that the Russians are now starting to cut these kinds of deals with third parties. And I think that's why we are increasingly seeing the blame game against Putin and Russia intensifying. And we're also seeing these strange and wonderful ideas made by people like Yellen. The idea that you can both have your Russian oil and not pay for it at the same time.
Yeah, they're blaming everybody for what's going on except themselves. Specifically, they're blaming Russia, but they're not looking at themselves. And what are they going to do now? Are they going to, is the collective West, are they going to regime change every country in Africa and in Latin America now? Because listening to you, all I can think about is gas for rubles, Latin America and Africa starting to transact outside of SWIFT, de-dollarization, oil for rubles, wheat for rubles. This is the biggest, this is the historically biggest policy mess up that you could, I couldn't have thought of a better way to destroy the collective West, the USD as reserve currency, the economies of Europe and the United States. I mean, they've done it better than I could have ever possibly imagined. Not even Putin himself would have designed a better way to destroy the West. I mean, yeah. It's incredible.
Yeah. Well, what is happening at the moment within the US government is that there's apparently a massive row underway between the Neocons in the State Department and the National Security Council, who want basically to start imposing secondary sanctions on everybody in order to choke off Russian oil. So, secondary sanctions against India, against the African states, expand the sanctions war, intensify it, shock and awe, a scorched earth in every direction. And the Treasury, under Yellen, which is trying to say, well, hold on, this is already going far enough, it's causing more and more economic damage. And the more we press on, the more damage we're doing to our own economic and world financial system. But that is the battle. That's what the argument in Washington is all about. And I must make the point, up to now, throughout this crisis, the Neocons have won every single round. I mean, they've always managed to press sanctions further than anybody thought that they would go. And, maybe we've now reached that point where, the resistance is becoming too strong. One gets the sense that, the Treasury Department is now saying, this has gone far enough. The Democratic Party, or the leaders of the Democratic Party, are saying, hold on, we've got midterms to win in November. cranking up sanctions like this, if it's going to escalate inflation even further, is going to generate an even bigger crisis. And of course, one also senses that the Pentagon has had enough, and they're basically saying no more big arms sales. There's resistance in Europe increasingly to big arms supplies to Ukraine. But, I have to make that point. Maybe we've reached that point where, they say we've come up against, this has been gone as far as it can. This is turning out wrong. The time has come to retreat, to start to rethink these strategies, to start perhaps looking for a diplomatic settlement. Even Yellen isn't talking about that at the moment. But at every round since the Biden administration came into office, the neocons have won. And I'm not a betting man, but I wouldn't put money against them even this time. However disastrous it looks, however catastrophic it appears, I think there's still a chance that we could see an even bigger sanctions escalation over the next few weeks.
Yeah, scorched earth. Macron is looking for an off-ramp. Schultz is looking for an off-ramp. Yesterday I read that Bulgaria has said no more weapons. I read that the Greek Defense Ministry has also said, outside of this German-Greek tank swap thing that they've got going on, which is just another way to hide corruption, they're not going to send any more weapons. Everyone is starting to put the brakes on and say we lost. They're trying to figure out different excuses. Even the New York Times had an article the other day with an excuse saying that essentially the Ukraine military has lost because the U.S. Military just didn't know what was going on the battlefield, and that's why things are turning out badly. So they're looking for excuses.
Exactly.
But if the neocons get their way, then you're going to see sanctions on India. They've already started on China, India. Who else? Brazil, Argentina, all of Africa, South Africa, Senegal. Scorched earth.
Absolutely, yes.
It's a catastrophe.
Which would be a complete catastrophe, and of course, it would be an economic disaster for everyone. But it would ultimately, the big winner in that case would be the Russians, because you see, you can replace manufactured goods as the Russians are showing. By the way, just on that topic, production at the AvtoVAZ factory, that's the Lada factory for most people, which is controlled by Renault. Well, previously, Renault stopped production. It withheld supplies, spare parts. But the Russians have been able to replace the spare parts, and AvtoVAZ has now resumed production. You can replace manufactured goods. You can't simply replace commodities. It's just not possible. Everybody needs food. Everybody needs energy. You can't just pull a switch, do a few things, and, you get oil and food to replace that which you're denying yourself. So that's simply not possible. If the neocons get their way, if they impose these secondary sanctions on everybody, then ultimately it will be the Russians who are the winners, because they're not just strong in one set of commodities. They're strong in all of them. That's why this constant harping about, Russia having an economy the size of Spain's it's so obviously wrong, because which country is strong in every single commodity, in metals, in rare earths, in special gases like neon gas, in coal, in gas, in oil, in wheat, in fertilizer, in products that make up fertilizer. This is a very diversified economy, and that isn't even looking at its scientific and manufacturing base. And this was never understood. And of course, the fact that the Russians are so diversified in terms of the commodities that they produce puts them in an incredibly strong position if the neocons do indeed start imposing these secondary sanctions on everybody.
Yeah, and the entire world's just going to check out of the U.S. system.
Oh, well, of course, yeah.
All of it, yeah. While Biden is going around looking for oil from Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and Iran, it's madness. Yeah,
it is madness. Well, quite so. Yes, But oil is a problem, and gas is a bigger problem, and food is a bigger problem still. And rare earths, limited supply of those, neon gas, no real substitutes. You can't find solutions to all these problems at one and the same time. It can't be done.
They really messed this one up in a big, big way, and they keep on digging. Keep on digging. Just get rid of the neocons. You've solved all your problems. It's so simple. Anyway, the regime change has to happen in the DC swamp, not at the Kremlin. And I mean the neocons, not anything else. I mean, get rid of these neocons once and for all. Anyway, we'll leave it there at theduran.locals.com, and go to the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY. Take care.